Hey everyone, welcome back to the Push Pull Podcast, where we dive into career inflection points that define who we become in our careers. This is part 2 of my conversation with Omar Dinar, picking up right where we left off in the thick of his journey at Barclays. He just transitioned from aerospace engineering into finance and joined Lehman Brothers at the height of the financial crisis, and then subsequently they got acquired by Barclays. We explore his transition from joining Barclays to getting into a management role and then pivoting back to an individual contributor role in order to be more focused on markets and the technical work. We cover his time at MUFG and ultimately his bold leap into wealth management. Omar reflects on setbacks, pivots, and what it really means to find work that aligns with your life and your values. One quick heads up, there is a good bit of static in the background of this episode. We were using a different setup and the audio didn't come out as clean as usual. I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out how to properly get it to remove the static, but still maintain the clarity of the words in the audio. But unfortunately, it didn't come out as clean as it normally does, but I appreciate your patience with the sound quality because the insights Omar shares today are absolutely worth sticking around for. So let's get into it. Okay, here again with Omar Dinar. Thank you so much for being with me again to talk about the kind of like phase 2 of your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here, Vern. Thank you for the chance.
Of course. So where we had left off, I had asked you a little bit about what your time at Barclays was like. We obviously know that you had been there for 6+ years, seen a couple of promotions, and you walked through a little bit of what the first phase of being at Barclays was like, which was really integrating post the acquisition of Lehman Brothers, all of the kind of how they manage risk, the software that they use, as well as like the cultural differences. So you went through that a little bit. And then I think what we were not able to get in the recording last time was what came next in terms of your career progression there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was probably 2009, let's call it, because the bankruptcy happened in September of 2008. And then we started going through all the integration, and the dust started to really settle in 2009, where we were able to start putting into place the teams, processes, and we were building up this team really from scratch, essentially, with a handful of people who were from Barclays and a handful of people such as myself who were from Lehman, trying to put this team and department together. And it led to some opportunities, fortunately, for me to really grow, not only in learning about this new area, this new field of risk management that really I had known very little about previously, that I was rapidly learning, but also this was my first opportunity to get involved in management and having direct reports. So that happened later that year, where as our team was growing capacity and we were expanding, because as the business was growing, there was a big need for this risk oversight, as well as just a lot of new regulations coming into play requiring more robust risk calculations and procedures. I was able to bring in my first direct report. And frankly, he's one of the best. I got lucky very early on. He was one of my best hires. Actually, my first 2 hires were my 2 best hires of my career. They're both fantastic. They're both extremely successful in what they do, and it just worked out that way. That I had that. They're like 1A and 1B in my mind. And what I was really looking for when I was trying to hire, I really valued was just not only that they can do the job, but what's their long-term potential? What's their ceiling? I always wanted to find people with high ceilings to work with. And so I wasn't just thinking about, okay, who would be the best person to do the job today, but where can they be 3, 5, 10 years from now? Am I going to be bringing in some really great talent? And maybe they won't be working for me their whole career and they're going to move on to bigger and better things. But that's what I really valued more than anything. Not necessarily maybe you had X number of years experience prior to that. That's good too, but really it was really the potential and of course the skill set. And those, based off of that criteria, I was really My first two hires, like I said, really checked those boxes, and they were fantastic. I've had several other hires subsequent to them, all of which were good in various ways. It's just that in terms of fit and everything overall, it just ended up working out really great with those two. And when I started to figure out how to manage people, I look back on two things. One was my first manager at Sikorsky, who was one of my first mentors in my career, and I really tried to emulate him and his approach. He was always very approachable, very humble, very knowledgeable, and reliable. And I wanted to be that for them. I wanted to make sure I could help guide them and make sure that they were always comfortable to come to me with questions, with issues, because I was really focused on trying to bring out the best in them, because then it made my job easier, because I can delegate. And that would give me a greater opportunity to do other things, more value-added things that were happening at Barclays at the time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. A couple of questions there, actually. When you think about making the right hires, and you were talking about these first couple that you really knocked it out of the park with, and thinking about those high ceilings, are there particular skill sets or competencies or personality traits that you were indexing on back then, or could look back in retrospect and say, oh, maybe this is why third or fourth hire were not the same caliber, let's say, as like first or second hire? Looking back on it?
Yeah, I think obviously they had the right skill set. It was very quantitative, so you needed to have a very strong math background, and some financial knowledge certainly helped as well. But it was really high character, high energy, really great attitudes, very ambitious people. And I think that combination where they had no problem coming in every day and working hard. I always felt like you can't teach attitude. You can teach most other things to your staff, but you really need them to come in on day one, ready to work and to work and to learn. And that's really what I always was looking for. And then as the team was growing, as I was hiring in more people, definitely I was trying to consider fit as well. Who are they going to be working with the most, and bring them into the interview process to make sure that fit. I had to take into account fit too, not only just skill set or high ceiling and all these other things. But then, so that started, there was a little bit more layers of complexity I had to consider as my team was growing in size.
Yeah. Tell me about what came next at Barclays. What were the kind of peaks and troughs of the challenges and the role that you had as a manager, and what ended up happening before you moved into your next role at Barclays? Yeah,
things were growing over time, and in terms of the business was growing, all these new regulations, all different ways we had to manage risk was growing over the years, and there was a big need to hire in people. So that gave me a really good opportunity there. It also, since things were going relatively well, they kept giving me more responsibility on the management side, and I started having a team that I was managing who were based in London as well. So I had staff in New York and in London that were reporting to me that I was trying to work with, trying to bring out the best, trying to delegate. And so that added a new layer, was people that we didn't have Zoom back then to be able to, everything was over the phone or chat or email. So you had to really start building, how do you build up that rapport? And it was really interesting. We were very international. We had offices in Singapore, London, and New York, and a lot of people I had never seen face to face, but they gave us a technology around shortly after that time where they put webcams on all of our computers, and when our phone would ring, if they also had a webcam, it would turn it on. And I think that just being able to see each other for the first time, I think that really made a huge difference also in being able to connect with them and just keep building up that rapport once you could see them. Because I didn't have too much opportunity to travel to London to see a lot of these people face to face. The video capabilities, which were early on, really helped. And also just culturally, in New York, there's certain demographics and people, and in London, there's some differences, and the cultural aspects also trying to take into account for as well at that time. Now, things were going well in this role, and I was more of a manager, having risk analysts come to me, report to me doing this day-to-day work. I had somebody approach me a couple of years in, asking me to join their team. I was going to move away from being a manager and being more focused on a specific trading desk and being far more connected with the markets again and a bit more technical. And I ended up taking that opportunity, not because I didn't enjoy managing people. I really did. I really enjoyed doing that. But I felt I was a little bit too far removed from the business and the markets, which I'm very passionate about. I have a huge interest in. And so I thought this would also help me just career-wise, adding in, so I didn't just have purely manager responsibility, that I was able to also have this experience as being more of a specialist. And so I made a switch a couple of years in at Barclays into this risk role where I was entirely focused on one particular trading desk and helping to manage the risk on a daily basis.
So you move away from this. So one of the things I'm curious about, obviously you did love managing people. The draw for you for this new role was to be a little bit more technical, be more exposed to the markets, which you weren't getting really an opportunity to do in the management role. One of the things I think we had talked about last time, I was curious, what were the aspects of being in a managerial role? And maybe it's not the direct relationships with people that you had, which I think clearly gave you a lot of energy and was really fulfilling. Were there aspects of being a manager that you didn't like so much?
The aspects of being a manager, you have to deal with personnel issues. It's typically when somebody who's reporting to you says to you, "Hey, can we step away and talk?" It's never because that they're happy. It's because that they're upset about something, or there's something that they want to, some issue that they're having, which is fine. That's part of the job. It does get a little bit political. Also, when you're a manager, I feel like one example, not to go too deep into, is like around bonuses. That when you're on a team and you're allocated a bonus pool and distributing that out, that can get a bit contentious too. And I'd say the last thing was sometimes you have to enforce things that maybe you don't necessarily totally agree with, but it's company policy. But there may be some things where it's told from above that has to get done, and maybe you're not in total agreement, but you need to do it because that's what needs to get done. And so I'd say those were kind of some of those kind of forces, like those that kind of dealing with from time to time as a manager.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'd be curious to know also, for those things that are essentially mandates that you're forced to essentially cascade down to your team, was there an expectation that you're also publicly in agreement with those things, or was it very much, guys, I don't like it either? How did you approach those as a manager?
I think you have to set an example, and so if I had to dictate this out, I had to buy into it myself. I felt, and so maybe there's something I wasn't in total agreement with, and that's fine. That's going to happen from time to time in the job, but you have to accept it, and then you have to then be able to deliver that down to your team. They're going to see if you're not being authentic. People are going to see through that. And I do feel like you have, as long as it's something that doesn't conflict with my morals or anything, which you never did, but whether it was a particular decision that maybe I didn't totally agree with, but found ways to accept it and then being able to deliver that down. I would be frank with people, acknowledging if it is a difficult thing that's being passed down, and be sympathetic for that. But I would want to try to buy into it as best I can and then deliver that message down to the team.
Makes sense. Cool. You're enjoying the management role. There are some maybe political and bureaucratic aspects of it that aren't as exciting to you, but more importantly, you're kept away from the markets and the technical side of things, which is something that's actually very interesting to you and something that you're passionate about, as well as something that you understand will redound to the benefit of your career further down the line. So you transition into this supporting trading desk role. Tell me about the kind of final stretch of your time at Barclays and how it wrapped up.
Sure. I did that for about 2 years, for my final 2 years at Barclays, which was really interesting and gave me some really good experience into some markets that I didn't know as much about at the time, and that was really good. But there was, in our industry, I like to say it's a pretty small industry. There's a lot of movement, and you tend to sometimes see people in other companies, and there was quite a lot of movement of people leaving Barclays and moving to another firm, to a Japanese firm. And I actually was contacted by a prior manager of mine from Barclays, who I had a very good rapport with, who was based in London. And he asked if I would be interested. He had a role he was hiring in this firm, which was more of a managerial based role, if I was interested in doing that and considering it, taking an interview, which I ended up doing. And ultimately then moving over to this Japanese firm, which had a very small footprint in the US at the time, but was quickly growing. And I think because of it being so small, it wasn't really siloed the way a large corporation like Barclays is, where you have very defined roles when you're in your position, in your department. And when you have a team of, let's say, 100 people at Barclays in one department, but at this Japanese firm at Mitsubishi, there were maybe 2 people doing it. And you were able to have a much bigger insight into a lot of different functions that you may have had very limited interaction with. So I found that to be really enticing, and then ended up moving to this Japanese bank after my 6 or so year tenure at Barclays.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that your motivations for making this transition was a combination of feeling maybe a little bit constrained by being part of a really giant financial institution and seeing the opportunity to be exposed to more parts of the business as well as the people aspect? It sounds like at Barclays, you either had the full people aspect, you have to be like totally embedded in and away from the markets, or like in the markets, but also not exposed to like different functions of the business. But like here, you've got to have your cake and eat it too a little bit.
To some extent, yeah. It was still a bit more managerial in the role, but definitely it gave me a chance to have a bit of both, like what you said. Absolutely.
Very cool. Cool. And this was MUFG, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. That was MUFG. Yep.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about your time there. Did you get to do as much hiring? Yeah. What was it like?
Yeah, I spent the next 4 years at MUFG. Immediately coming in, there was somebody already there who came in to report to me. Him and I had then started building up a really good rapport, and he worked for me for my full 4 years there. And just similar to Barclays in that at that time they were growing quite rapidly. They were looking to build a U.S. base for this Japanese bank and not just do U.S. business for Japanese clients, but also building up a base in the U.S. So they were putting in a lot of resources into growing and expanding this operation in New York. And so that gave me then opportunities to start expanding the team, which we were able to do. So as we were adding in new businesses, that created more need for people in these functions. And it wasn't just, it gave me insights into there's multiple areas of risk. And when you're in a large institution, you're really centric around that one aspect. For example, for me, it was market risk. But I was able to get insight into pretty much all the different areas of risk management and really get to know those specific areas. But also because the firm was so small, I was able to also form some really good partnerships with the business, with the trading desks, and be able to get really down into the weeds at the same time into understanding the business, understanding all these other areas of risk, and also managing a team. And it was really enjoyable. I learned a ton during that time that could have taken me much longer at Barclays because I would have probably had to change jobs, change roles to be able to do that, since being a bit more siloed in a big organization. So that gave me a huge amount of experience and new knowledge being in that role.
Yeah. How did your role change over time while you were there? I'm curious. You said that you were exposed to a lot. Did you have pretty clean kind of distinctions between phases of your time there, different projects you were working on, or like scope of your responsibilities, whether it was more managerial work versus others? I know you said you were more of a manager there, but
yeah, I think one thing that happened about 2 years in were some new regulatory changes that happened that, not to go too deep into it, but basically all the different, not just the businesses within the company, but there were a retail bank and a commercial lending institution that were all underneath the MUFG banner, which operated pretty much as independent entities. We had to be more connected, that we had to set up a consolidated U.S. holding company, which was a new regulation about 2 years in. And so that changed, and that got me into a lot more of a project management type role, where I was balancing out managing some projects in addition to managing teams because of that. And so I'd say about halfway through is where things changed a bit, where we weren't just this small operation that was growing. All of a sudden, we were consolidated with all these other parts of the business that were previously separate, and then that changed quite a bit. And so the next 2 years was still within the trading operation where I was at, was still growing, but we were far more connected with the retail and the lending and all these other areas of the business that we previously had zero relationship with. And so I'd say that's when things really changed a lot. I'd say was kind of around that 2 year mark.
Yeah. Tell me about what led to your wrapping up your time at MUFG.
It was really had to do with one of the biggest disappointments in my career. I was put up for promotion, and that was the one time in my career I didn't get it. And crushing was, and you put a lot of your hopes, and you understand it's not guaranteed, but still, when you're told no, it's not happening this year, that we don't think you're ready yet, even though you really felt like you were ready, and your peers were all in supportive of you and your management. But they have a very opaque process into the promotions, and understandably, and it just didn't work out. And I took that very personally. And I had decided, and it wasn't the right, it ended up not being the right move, but I was trying to move based off of, to get that promotion, which I ended up doing. I ended up finding a role in a different firm, a U.S.-based bank called State Street, but with the title I was desiring. But I think I ended up doing it for the wrong reasons, not more out of just anger or spite more than anything else. And that ended up being a very short-lived role, which for factors out of my control. Basically, around that time I moved back to Connecticut with my wife from New York. We just bought a home. We were looking to start a family and lay down our roots here. And less than a year into my role, there was a big reorg, and my job was going to move to Boston. And I wasn't going to make that move. My priorities had changed to where I knew that raising a family was going to become a big aspect. And both my wife and I are originally from Connecticut, and we really wanted to do it where we had purchased our home, which we're still at today. And I made a decision then that I was going to step down when I was given an opportunity to do. And then I had to really think about what to do next. And that's where I made my pivot into where I'm at today.
Yeah, thank you for walking me through that, and I really appreciate your candor about the end of your time at MUFG. I think that it's something that a lot of people can really empathize with and have probably felt themselves in terms of that immediate gut reaction to being passed over for a promotion. And one of the things that you had mentioned was that, okay, maybe I was doing it for the wrong reasons. Obviously, it eventually led you to a place where you've said that you're incredibly happy and fulfilled, which is really wonderful. But I would be curious, what would you recommend to somebody who might be in that position where, they are historically a high performer? I guess a couple of different questions. One is like, what would you say to somebody who is in a similar position, who's historically a high performer and gets passed over for a promotion that they think that they're very much worthy for, is one question. And the second is, if you took a look at your environment at the time, was it accurately one in which you could not actually get promoted, double down on your efforts one way or another in the next year, and see if in the next cycle you get promoted?
Yeah, I'd say maybe I reacted too quickly. I should have waited out a little bit to let the emotions settle first before making that kind of decision. But I think what really led me to it was because of some external factors, I just didn't feel like I had the adequate support by upper management, where it may potentially happen again. I think if I had that full trust in some of the senior managers that I work for, then I think I would have thought differently. And I think that was also a factor. I feel when you feel at times, if you don't feel like you have your senior managers, you don't have their full support, then also I think that was another factor that led me. So I think one is to try to rationalize as best you can, because sometimes this happens to people, whether I've seen other people who are very qualified get past, and then 1 or 2 or 3 years later, they get their promotion that they deserve, or in some cases, they leave their firm to get that promotion. I've seen both happen. So I think it comes down to, as long as you still think that long term, that's still the right company, that's still the right role for you to try to tough through to get that promotion in the next however many years it takes. I think that's really the decision that you have to make sure that you have that support and that you're still in the right place to be able to work through to get that promotion.
That makes perfect sense to me, because it's also that level of trust or feeling like the senior leadership didn't have your back is not a sentiment that shows up when you get told you're not getting the promotion, right? That's something that probably has a lot of symptoms that you're seeing or maybe ignoring because you're focused on the work and you have a goal in mind for yourself in your career. But then that kind of that sense of maybe distrust or feeling like, hey, this might not actually be the right place for me, maybe ossifies, and the signal to you is that lack of promotion at the time. Is that fair to say? Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. How you summarize this?
Yeah. You got a title at State Street. Long story short, you end up making a move. They end up essentially asking you to relocate a short amount of time into your stint there, which obviously for personal reasons you're not going to do. You had just settled in, started family, all that kind of stuff. So what comes next after you turn down moving?
Yeah. So that's where I was ready to take this leap. I've had in the back of my mind for a couple of years, knowing that I didn't want to do risk for the rest of my career. I felt like at some point it's unsustainable, that you can't easily spend the rest of your career in these functions, that eventually the inevitable happens and you end up what I call pricing yourself out of the role and being laid off or whatever the case is. I felt like I wanted to make a transition into something that I find more fulfilling and enjoyable, and something that would give me a bit better work-life balance, not necessarily working less, but just having a bit more flexibility in my schedule, since I knew family was going to become a much, much bigger aspect of my life. So a couple of years earlier, I ended up caught my attention a certificate program at NYU in financial planning. I did that for about 6-7 months at nights, just like when I had done my first master's, learn about something new and see whether that's something that would interest me as a career. And so I did that over the time, and I thought, I think this is something I want to do at some point in my career. This is something helping others with their financial needs would be something I would genuinely enjoy and just be happy doing. And so that was my opportunity then. I saw that as an opportunity. Let me take the risk and give it a try. And I spoke with my wife about it first. And I was saying, hey, this is a little bit more risky. Instead of going into another role that I've done before that could probably be much more stable. And my wife was pregnant at the time. She was in her third trimester, and she was very supportive, thankfully. And I started taking interviews at local wealth management firms here in Connecticut, and ended up coincidentally, I was supposed to have one of my rounds of interviews at Merrill Lynch, and that was the day my wife went into labor. And I forewarned the company after the first round, saying this is beyond the due date for my wife. I may have to cancel last minute. And at about 6 a.m. from the hospital room, in between contractions, I was able to email them to let them know my wife's in labor and I'll have to reschedule. Unfortunately, they were totally fine about it. They were very accommodating. And I really loved, what stood out for me with the different firms I was interviewing with was I really genuinely thought I clicked really well with the management that I interviewed with, and felt like I would be really well supported in this new role, where it is fairly risky. You're building up a client base from nothing. You have a limited window to do that, and if you don't, you're out the door. And historically, those percentages aren't in your favor. So I knew I was taking a risk, so I wanted to make sure I found a company and a management team that I think would be a really great fit and be very supportive. And so that's why I took the role at Merrill, and I didn't have the best timing. I seem to have really terrible timing when I'm making career changes. I did that in the end of 2019, had to do some securities license exams and training and so forth. And I was on the ground running, starting to build up a client base February of 2020. And then just a few weeks later, our offices shut down and the whole world goes upside down because of COVID. So that was, not the best timing again.
Yeah. Did that impact your kind of like ramping up at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, first off, I was planning to do different in-person type meetings and networking events, and that all went out the door. Couldn't do that. There were also a lot of just being able to how to interact with people, and also with the markets being where they were at that time, so turbulent. A lot of people were more in like a wait and see mode, which was totally fair for those first few months. A lot of people that were interested in working with me. It really started, summertime is when it really started to build up, because by then the markets had recovered. We knew that this was going to be what the reality of the situation was going to be like for the next year or so. And then things started to move along after that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious about you talked a little bit about kind of the risk of moving into kind of a new function within finance. You had talked a little bit about some of the risks in risk management and like staying in that career, pricing yourself out over time as you gain seniority, etc. What were the draws to wealth management for you?
I think just the overall job satisfaction. I have to borrow this from you when we were talking previously, where this kind of mixed the best of both worlds between kind of the people aspect of the job, which I really love. Now it's with clients. Previously it was with people working for me, and then the market side of things. I think this is, for me, for what I enjoy doing and my skill set, I think this is the perfect one doing this job. It's something I really genuinely enjoy, which, at times I haven't been always able to say that previously, and just the variability from one day to the next. When you are in risk management, there's certain things that have to be done every day on a daily basis, certain metrics that get calculated, certain reports that need to get viewed, certain things that have to happen. So a lot of, at least half of my day was very similar each day. And I don't have that here, and it's great. And also it gives me that schedule flexibility, which I really wanted. So now I can join my wife and I walk our now 5-year-old son out to the bus stop every morning, drop him off. I could start my day before that here at home. I'll hit the road at some point in the morning, go into my office a couple of days a week. And if I need to, something's going on personally, I can a lot of times be there, and then I help raise my son and balance out, especially kind of post-COVID, being able to work remotely. The technology has gotten so good and robust. I can have a home office here, so I can do a lot of work throughout the day while still being able to be around my family. And I feel like that this role gives me that flexibility far better than prior roles I was in.
Yeah, I love that. I remember, I think we had drawn the line through from even the transition that you made at Barclays, where you really love the people management side of things, but there was the process and administrative aspect, political aspect of the personnel management that was not as fulfilling to you as the relationship side of things. And then when you made that transition because you wanted to focus on products and markets, there are instances where you try to find the ability to strike the right balance to be able to do more of the people empowerment side of things, as well as be close enough to the markets that you're learning and staying up to date. And the other thing that I think is really beautiful is that over time, the other thing that you're starting to prioritize as you just become a grown-up and have a family is making sure that you have the time and the flexibility to make sure that your life is well taken care of and your family is well taken care of as well. And it sounds over time you've been calibrating for your kind of career professional fulfillment as well as life fulfillment needs, and getting closer and closer to exactly where you want to be, which it sounds like is where you are right now with the kind of like empowering people, the aspect of management philosophies that you even picked up in your MBA that you're able to apply to client management, the actual kind of like product and market exposure, as well as the life stuff, which I think is really wonderful.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to summarize it. It took For some people, it takes them sooner to come to that realization to balance things out. It took me a little longer, which is fine. And the other thing I would just also say is just in terms of, I was very fortunate at Merrill was I was able to start partnering up with an advisor. She just celebrated her 26th year at the firm.
Wow.
It's amazing. And we've collectively over the last 4.5 years built up a team of advisors and client associates, which are a bit of our administrators. And I've been building out this shared practice. And it's been really wonderful where when you're able to have somebody that you work really well with and click with, and somebody you really do genuinely trust, because you're sharing clients, you're sharing revenue, you're sharing a paycheck almost. So, it really worked out so well that I was able to partner up, and now we've been building up this rapidly growing team at Merrill, and a lot of it is just because I was able to, fortunately, my teammates who were starting to work together realized it clicked really well after a few months before we decided, okay, we're gonna do this.
Awesome. Cool. Omar, I guess a couple of different things. One is, what are you excited about for this kind of next phase of your career? You're settled into a position that you really like. You have an awesome partner. What are you excited about? And then the second question really is, as you're reflecting on your career, what parting words of wisdom would you like to share with our audience?
Sure. So I'd say this is the first role I've had in my career where I can say I'd like to do this for the rest of my career. And it took me a while to get here. So hopefully that works out and I can do this for a couple more decades and keep enjoying it now as I will, let's say 20 or so years from now. I think other things at the job is, I think it's just amazing being able to work with my clients, build these relationships that are going to last for years and for decades. So obviously with people that would report to me, most times that would be for 1, 2, 3 years, a lot of which I'm still in touch with and become good friends of mine. But still to be able to have these clients, building up these rapport, working with them, seeing them go through their lives, their milestones, seeing them get married, have kids, buy homes, second homes, retire, whatever the case is, being a part of all that is really fulfilling, and being able to help be a part of that is great. And I think just on the parting thoughts, for me, I think I try to plan things out maybe too much at times. Every time I made a change, a new phase in my career, it took a lot. It took a lot of thought. It was a couple-year process. I don't like to just act erratically. I like to try to be educated on it as much as possible. In each case, when I made a transition in my career, there was some education component that was going into it. There was me reaching out, speaking with people, trying to get as much insight so I can make the most informed decision possible for me to know that this would be a good long-term fit. And lastly, I tried to always hold myself to a deadline, to keep myself accountable. I knew for by 06, I wanted to get into an MBA program. I had personally set up, when I was starting to think about wealth management, I did that certificate program at NYU. I had just put in a date of summer of 2020. And that was a couple of years prior. And I did it a year sooner. But I think if I hold myself to a deadline, that's going to keep me that much more on point and driven to be able to hit these goals, to be able to make that transition. And sometimes it can be daunting, taking that leap of faith and going into the unknown. Even with this much education or research or whatever, there's still unknown aspects. But you have to be willing to take that risk.
Yeah. Taking well-calibrated risks, thought through, and also setting things like deadlines to hold yourself accountable. I think that's all a great set of advice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Omar, for sharing your whole story, being willing to share the story again with me here for my benefit and my audience's benefit. Really enjoyed getting to know you and to meet you, and thanks so much for being willing and able.
Thank you, Varun. You have a great podcast here that you've been really growing out. I'm looking forward to seeing your podcast just keep getting bigger and bigger. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Okay. All the best.
Thank you.
That was part 2 of my conversation with Omar Dinar, and I'm really grateful for his vulnerability, thoughtfulness, and clarity in tracing such a dynamic career path. From being passed over for a promotion to building a practice that he truly loves and owns, Omar's story is a reminder that setbacks in our career don't have to define us, but how we respond to them might. I appreciated that he was incredibly thoughtful about taking those bets on himself, but doing so in a way where he is well planned and well thought out, and eventually finding work-life balance when life ended up needing to be prioritized. Thanks again for bearing with the audio static. We've got more clean sound and compelling stories coming your way soon. As always, if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to subscribe, leave a review, or reach out. I would love to hear what resonated. And until next time, stay curious and keep pushing or pulling towards whatever's next for you.